XCOM Chimera Squad. Well, it's been quite a while since I played an XCOM game. Don't think I ever got around to finishing XCOM 2 vanilla. Only other recent game besides XCOM Enemy Unknown I can remember playing was that weird The Bureau one, which I didn't like all that much. For me, these games have always been a type of brain exercise, but with a more casual, almost relaxing activity. Booting up an old game of Command and Conquer has the same effect for me. There is something I find to be stress relieving about having to micromanage and preempt or problem solve when playing these types of games. I sort of go into casual autopilot game mode. From what most people know about XCOM as a series is it's about unit management on a turn-based grid movement type battlefield. A game of chess and rock paper scissors, moving pieces on the board that can counter other enemy units. Pre-mission micromanagement of unit training, purchasing gear, pumping resources into facility upgrades, situation management, and map control. The core gameplay has always been about the humies versus the aliens, traditionally having a very strict formula that most of the games in the series tend to stick to, which you could always argue if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would love to say that XCOM Chimera Squad is part of that old saying, but it misses the whole point, being that it breaks what wasn't broken somehow. Now before I start going into what's gone a bit wrong, I want to tell you a bit more about this XCOM Lite game version, because that's what it essentially is. It's just this little light spin-off title to the main series games. The game takes place 5 years after the expansion content of XCOM 2. Which I think at this point the Advent have been defeated and humanity and the many alien races now calling Earth home have to find a way to peacefully coexist. We can see all this unfold in the story setting of City 31, an experimental city of the future that hopes to be the leading example of human-alien cohabitation. Now the first impressions that I have of this game was that it's going to be over-the-top 80s themed novelty, fluoro colours and cringy dialogue included. Surprisingly, I was wrong. I guess I judged the game a little too soon just from that brief reveal trailer. Most of the story is pretty simple, and not too much of the game has you sitting through many cutscenes to throw massive amounts of story content at you. It tends to stick to the gameplay, with brief comic strip-like cutscenes, and sporadically includes art stills during missions. What immediately sets this game apart in terms of its narrative and, in turn, its gameplay mechanics, revolve around its characters. Instead of the normal random unit generation that we have seen in the past XCOM games, in Chimera Squad you get set and predetermined units from the beginning. These roles have been created to have much more solid personalities, each with their own fascinating backstories and bios for you to delve into. This can be the best or the worst part about the game depending on what you like about the XCOM series. You won't have every character available to you at the beginning of course, and you'll have moments where you'll have to select which units you want to recruit once they become available, but otherwise it's just a small group you are stuck with. For me, I actually like that the characters were set rather than random. It makes it so much easier to have defined personalities with a smaller group as well. It gives the game a bit more life and feeling, as well as a chance to form a close relationship between squad members. Outside of missions, they will banter with each other if you care to listen in. Even in mission, they can sometimes call out to their squad mates with a little praise or encouragement. The first set characters form the skeleton crew of the untested Chimera Squad, led by the close quarters combat specialist Godmother and filled by many diverse and unique specialist roles, humans and aliens alike. It's Chimera Squad's job to show that XCOM has a place in this new society. Their job is to represent and support the new government of City 31, respond to emergency situations, and quash any dissidents who would disturb the fragile balance. The main opposition Chimera Squad will come up against are the secretive crime factions that want to turn to the old warring state or to overthrow what they see as oppression, them seeing the government being too controlling of the alien races here in the city. It's these sinister factions that you have to combat when on missions, having to choose which faction you want to deal with first. Each has particular units with unique attributes and abilities, some focusing on psionic abilities, others made up of robotic opponents, each with particular alien races which make up their forces. For the majority of the game, you'll be in your prep or hub area of XCOM before each mission. This is where the familiar micromanagement and menuing will return. Now we have to start with the units, or rather characters you'll get to make up Chimera Squad. You have 4 units that you will assign to your APC to be able to send them out on missions. Everything you need to outfit them, train them, and resource them will be at the hub area. Because of these set units, you won't be able to customize them all too much or have a giant pool of roles to choose from. You have Terminal, who will be the medic role, Verge, who is your psionic user, and Patchwork is the robotics expert. You won't have the same customization options even present in the last XCOM game either. No armor options or anything of the like. You can change the color of a unit's gear, but that's about it. Like I said, this really is the light version of XCOM. The only flexibility you have is what gear and items you can equip on units, like medkits or protective ones like mind control immunity. Each unit has their set main weapons that you can't change to another type, only being able to change to upgraded weapons or the unique rare quality ones found in the field. Armor is even less varied, with only upgraded versions or additional mods like extra padding with +1 armor or adrenal weave for bonuses to dodge. Mods on weapons will be the only effective customization you really have to work with. Weapon mods are pretty vital to how the game functions when on missions, especially the ones that change how often you'll be able to take a turn or grant you extra reloads or rapid fire abilities. Everything else you can buy and equip will basically come down to damage bonuses, stat boost, or utility items like grenades. The basic customization for how you want to train a unit will be available when reaching milestones when a unit gets promoted. Promotions being earned from missions by gaining experience. I think at 2nd and 4th promotions you get 2 options to choose from. These you lock in once you have made your choice, choices that will often have a new bonus or attribute attached to that unit's unique ability. The actual training that is available is in the mission prep screen, along with all the other facilities that Chimera Squad has access to. Training can unlock a squad member's potential and the like. The time it takes to complete that training will vary, and you won't be able to use that unit on missions. The other use for training is to heal battle scars. Battle scars occur when a unit gets gravely wounded during a mission. Scars will have stat penalties on them until they are healed. Chimera Squad works a little differently in terms of downed units. When a unit gets downed, they start to bleed out. You need to stabilize that unit. In a normal XCOM game, if you don't stabilize a unit, they'll die and be lost from your roster forever. In this game, no units are lost. Instead, the game prevents you from completing the mission instantly the moment a unit bleeds out for a set number of turns. If a unit is stabilized during a mission but the mission encounter continues, you still won't be able to use that unit. Instead, you have some robot recruitments to call upon for that time to fill the squad back up. These robots you can build upgrades for to strengthen their effectiveness in combat and repair them if they are damaged on missions. Now it's time to talk about the bulk of the gameplay. First up is the pre-mission strategy and planning phase before you send out your squad. The game operates on a day system. Every action will generally have a set amount of days or turns that will take to complete. Researching better gear for your squad takes time. Putting a unit to work on research can speed this process up a few days. This is the same for spec op missions. Whichever task, if it requires a unit, you'll have to have one to spare to get the job done, pulling them from your APC roster for missions. Always needing 4 units free to even be able to go out on missions. You need to have enough units to spare for when events happen on the city map as days go by. The city map operates on these day or turn cycles too. Daily situations will pop up periodically. These can be selected to auto-resolve that situation for that day without the need for Chimera Squad to be physically sent out. Situations offer 3 sets of resource rewards: Illyrium, Intel, or credits. Illyrium is used to research better armor, weapons, and gear for your squad. Credits you need to buy gear for your team as well as mods and utility items. Intel is probably the most important, as it's used to buy rare items when they show up in the scavenger market, plus you need intel to control the anarchy in City 31. Each district of this city will have a level of anarchy that increases daily and will increase more depending on that district's level of unrest. Intel can buy you some field teams to have set up in each region. The field teams will be deployed with particular operations. These are what type of rewards you'll receive at the end of a week, whether that be credit, intel, or Illyrium focused resources. Upgrading these field teams also costs intel, but by upgrading them you can gain more of the chosen resource for that district, as well as decreasing more unrest per week. The anarchy level of City 31 is basically same as in previous games. You have to keep an eye on the levels, use functions to decrease unrest, perform actual missions to lower it, and try to preempt unrest rising too high in the turns or days that you have. It's this strategy phase that will dictate what missions become available, when they'll become available, and if a district breaks out into an emergency situation. When this happens, you'll have no choice but to respond to that situation immediately. The day will not be able to be ended until you deal with it. Overall anarchy can absolutely reach critical levels to the point where you can game over, pretty much forcing a restart or reload to a save way back in the timeline. It's not really as scary as it sounds though. On normal difficulty, you aren't likely to go above 2 or 3 bars of overall anarchy. Outside of controlling unrest within the city, your main goal is to uncover the operations of each of the 3 factions. This will take time, and you'll have to unlock investigations to reach the source of these criminal activities. Periodically there'll be missions that connect to the main faction. Completing these will decrease the time it will take for you to uncover faction missions you are investigating. After completing these, you'll get little broadcasts from command about the current situation, giving you little tidbits of narrative in this otherwise gameplay focused title. When getting closer to the leaders of these factions, you'll even have to decide which forces are going to be present. It's sort of this lose-lose choice though. It's up to you which additional forces you think you'll be able to handle better. Dark events can sometimes be connected to these investigations whether you like it or not. These generally only affect the difficulty of that particular mission though. Once you actually uncover these factions and their leaders, you'll be able to attempt these difficult missions, which will contain the toughest versions of the units you've been facing up until this point, as well as the faction leader. Okay, so now we move on to the actual gameplay of XCOM Chimera Squad. First of all, there's a big change and massive shift from how engagements usually start and how encounters are dealt with. Whatever type of encounter you are heading into, be that hostage protection, contraband recovery, suspect apprehension, or lethal force destruction, you'll start at a breach phase. This changes the game more than you would expect. For starters, just as a design aesthetic, it makes the game feel more like this special forces operation. You can post up units on particular entry points like a side door accessed by hacking a security door, breach charge through a wall, or rappel in onto unsuspecting foes. This breach phase has bonuses or penalties depending on which order a unit is placed on that breach point or the likelihood of being injured when entering. Using breaching charges often catches enemies unprepared. This means that it's less likely they will react with opening shots at the team, and it's more likely you will get a surprised damage bonus on enemies. Every squad member either has an inherent ability to determine what breach options you have, or they can be equipped with items to unlock options. Torque, for example, is a snake alien lady. She's my favourite. She has the ability to slide herself into vent breach points. Some missions you won't get as many breach options as others, forcing units to be placed in the only available breach spots. These harder missions will have penalties on any unit that enters, like routing that unit for the first turn, making enemies harder to hit, or having enemies have an opening shot at your squad before the round starts. The breach phase will have every one of your squad members be able to have essentially a free round to take shots at what units you think you need to take out first, and offers you a slowed down look at the area and the units in range. Once the breach phase ends, your squad will run to take cover before the round begins. On the right side of the screen will be the timeline for the encounter. This shows your units and the enemy units and when your turns will take place. This is how you can formulate a plan of attack to try to deal with enemies before they get their turns, counter attacks from them if you can't take them out, prepare for incoming shots, or stun them to push them down the timeline. The closer you are to an enemy, the higher chance you have to hit them. It's also wise to maneuver your squad behind cover, some cover providing much better protection than others. All units will have their set weapons, skills, and abilities. Some can move further around the grid-like play area. Some have long-range weapons, some have disabling attacks, and some, like Torque and Verge, have some impressive lockdown abilities. Every ability or movement costs action points. Some action points are used up when moving around to a better position behind cover, some get used when you need to reload a weapon, and others, like a unit's unique ability, often cost the most. Using the timeline and your hit likelihood guide when targeting an enemy allows you to plan out your attacks and movements. Some targets need to be prioritized, not just because they might damage you too much. Sometimes they might call more units. In hostage missions, some will be nominated as a hostage taker, and some even try to flee, making their way to the next encounter and bolstering their forces. That's right, some missions can consist of up to 3 encounters you'll have to deal with. Once the mission criteria has been met for that first breach phase, you'll move to the next encounter. Fortunately, you'll get another breach phase to plan ahead. Terminal can heal up units standing near if the squad's looking a bit hurt, and Patchwork has a handy scan ability that will give you a targeting bonus on the next group of enemies when you breach. For how long and how many encounters are likely, it's best to weigh up these breach point options to conserve your squad's health. So maybe a more damaged unit should take a safer side window this time, or maybe if everyone's looking alright, then you can separate them to have better angles on as many targets inside the room as possible. It's also good to try and move your units out of harm's way and to try stop enemies from flanking. By the end of the game, things start to look pretty broken. By this point you have the best armor available, so enemies aren't doing that much damage. Having ridiculous bonuses like 2 hit points restored per turn, auto reloads, free reloads. The more promotions a unit gets, the better abilities you have access to, even having some innate bonuses given to them. Godmother can have this close quarters proc that allows her to fire automatically at targets who come too close to her, even if it's not her turn. Put her in a choke point or have her out front to aggro attacks and she'll take out everything without you lifting a finger. Patchwork has a shock drone. Get too close to her and the drone will shock them. Send the drone out and it can shock enemies and chain that shock if they are standing together. Human enemies will often get stunned or disoriented, and robot enemies will shut down for a few turns. She can also reprogram robot units to fight for your side too. Torque has an ability that allows her to use her tongue to pull allies or enemies around the map. With allies, you can pull them back to safety, and with enemies, you can bind them up. This stops them from having the turn, and damages them if you continue to hold them in the bind, effectively taking that unit out of the fight. Verge, when at his highest rank, is basically unstoppable. Besides having great movement and dodging capabilities, he has powerful psionic abilities. He can stupor targets to stun them, lift targets into the air and then slam them down. Stuporing targets links them to his neural network. At high level, for every enemy linked to the neural network, Verge gets healed. So like you can have 5 units, stunned mind you, plus they will heal him 5 hit points for Verge's turn. If that wasn't broken enough, if you select the right skill, enemies killed while in his neural network actually get knocked out. So instead of losing the link, Verge can heal off unconscious units even though they're out of battle. Enemies can't even stop it because they can't target unconscious units. Then his most OP ability, for one-time use, he can puppeteer all neural linked enemies so you can now control them all on your team. It's these late game, game-breaking tools that make the game so much fun to play. You have these little optimizations that can change everything, like using Torque to pull enemies to her but have Patchwork and Godmother next to her, meaning Godmother will shoot anything close to her and Patchwork's drone will shock them too. Using Terminal to pin down enemies with suppressing fire to make them lose turns, having Patchwork reprogram androids and send them over to the enemy side to self-destruct amongst their forces. There is a real turning point where your squad no longer feels like they're struggling and they have full control of the encounter instead. But unfortunately, this game suffers a bit from a few issues. I don't know what it was, but my game crashed way too many times. It probably happens when the lag gets too much for the game. The lag always happens when the game has to think for itself, like the AI pathing, auto attack procs, when enemy reinforcements arrive. It just jams up a lot. Patchwork's drone was probably the worst offender. It makes this horrible loud audio loop as it flies over to an enemy and then floats there doing nothing for a while till the game can figure out what it needs to do. AI pathing is wonky, they go into some weird places or they just walk back and forth aimlessly. Units bug out on geometry if they step into a shooting stance, they float in the air when they get stuck trying to mantle over cover. The funniest thing was the way units smash out windows and stuff to get a clear shot, only to turn around and shoot through the wall instead. Or when the game can't keep up with target switching and they fire their weapons before lining up the target. The models generally just wonk the fuck out for most of the game. It's really hard to try and ignore how janky this game is. Overall though, it's a cheap game, so I forgave it a lot. XCOM Chimera Squad is just this little side game to play while waiting for something more substantial. Like I said, it's XCOM light. Emphasis on the light part. Its length is on the light side, the story is light, the gameplay is light. It's just this snack-sized morsel that's easy to digest. It's the most streamlined form of XCOM I've ever seen. Nearly all the most convoluted and daunting parts of XCOM have been made more user-friendly in Chimera Squad. Like other games in the XCOM series, they still have this relaxing, cathartic quality to them, with this game being no different. Probably best played in short bursts and fired up occasionally when you want a short session. Besides the stupid amount of crashes and the overall lack of polish to this game, it's kinda decent. Don't expect too much from it and you can enjoy it for what it is. It's not a real XCOM and thankfully it's not trying to place it either. Short, sweet, sometimes hilariously janky, but it has some great storytelling mechanics that make it feel a little more personal, a lot different to how disconnected some XCOM games can feel.